Thank you for joining us. My name is Gregory Jackson. I'm the Deputy Director at the Patricia and Philip Frost Art Museum, FIU. On behalf of our President, Dr. Mark Rosenberg, and the 54,000 plus students across our campuses, I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to tonight's lecture with artist Ryan Trecartin. Tonight's program marks the opening and launch of the Helen Venero Artist Lecture Series. This series will bring the world's most important and innovative contemporary artists to the Frost twice per year. This program affords established and emerging visionary artists the opportunity to discuss their work in depth through lectures and presentations, engaging the university community and the public. Funded by a generous gift from Augustine F. Venero in honor of his late wife Helen and her work at the Frost Art Museum as a steadfast educator and devout volunteer, this series seeks to expand the understanding of the work of leading figures in the art world. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and recognize Mr. Venero. There he is. Thank you so much, Mr. Venero, and the rest of the Venero family. And if everybody can take a moment to pull out your cell phone and put it on vibrate. We are recording the lecture this evening, and so out of respect for the artist and to your fellow audience members, we'd just like you to silence them. Actually, if you could just turn it off, because even on vibrate, you sometimes get that little funny noise. And while you're doing that, I'll tell you a little bit more about the artist. Heralded by the New Yorker as the most consequential artist to have emerged since the 1980s, Ryan's work is currently on view throughout the world, and the upcoming new museum, Triennial, which he is co-curating with Lauren Cornell. Tonight, Ryan will discuss a range of his projects. Facilitating that discussion will be Dr. Alpesh Patel, Assistant Professor of Contemporary Art and Director of the MFA program in Visual Arts here at FIU. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to present Mr. Ryan Trecartin.
All right, everybody. Yes, you can hear me. Okay, I can hear myself. Ryan, thank you again for coming to FIU, and the Venero family, thank you for endowing this lecture series. This is a really wonderful opportunity for, especially the students here at FIU, to come and listen to fantastic artists. I wanted to start by giving like a brief overview of what I think I've gotten out of your body of work as I've been really immersing myself in the last week, I think. And I'm hoping your conversation about specific works will help flesh this kind of very conceptual idea out. But it seems to me like, from what I'm experiencing with your work, and I have a lot of interest in identity, so much of this is a projection of what I'm hoping to see in the work as well. But I feel very much that there is this idea of identity and subjectivity as being very collaborative and networked with others, and identity is not only connected to bodies that are sort of raced and gendered and classed, but also sort of sensing and feeling and hearing as well, and that it would be understood within spaces and time. And that's a lot to kind of, I think, swallow. It's a fantastic amount of information that I think gets really produced in your work. And I wanted to start with an early work, and I didn't ask you about this, but I hope you're okay that I'm showing a work of yours from 2001. So this is when you were at RISD as an undergraduate, and it's a work called Kitchen Girl that includes one of your collaborators, Lizzie Fitch. There's two reasons I'm including this. One, because when I found out about the work, and I didn't know it really existed, I was really surprised and excited to see that some of your formal choices that we see later in your work are already there in 2001. And I think more importantly, this connection with Lizzie, which, again, this kind of collaborative network aspect of the work is already very strongly present there. So I wanted to show this 3-minute clip of Kitchen Girl. Again, this is from 2001. Um,
Do you want dinner? Open up. Mommy says open up. It's gonna be really good. Beans and peas and sneakers. I want to spread the Hardy Boys. Guys, hey, hey. Now you're gonna sit here, and you here, and you here. And now it's time to cook! Frying pan, where are you? There you are! Frying pan, I'm gonna cook with you. Hot, dip, jump, hot, where's my ingredient? Do. Apples. All you need is water. They don't appreciate my cooking. The fuck of you. The fuck of you. I'm tired with you. And you. The fuck of you.
when was the last time you saw that, I guess? I mean,
I don't know, like a long time ago. I mean, well, thanks y'all for coming. And but that, do you want to tell you where it came from or how?
You know, you can develop the conversation, I think, in whatever way you're interested. But I think what I'd love for you to talk about is Lizzie Fitch as well, and that collaboration, which is really, continued on since then, and grows stronger, and I think, and has really developed in lots of other complex ways. So, yeah, maybe the artist process, like how does this happen, right? This 3-minute video, what is the process that gets there?
Well, that was the first time I ever edited. I always knew I wanted to make movies, but it wasn't until I was in college that I found out about iMovie, because we had like a PC at home, and I didn't even know about Macs at the time, but and iMovie was just so intuitive and user-friendly, and it was very, it was very easy to use. So I like immediately like fell in love with editing because of it. And I feel like a lot of the early sort of, even though I was actually majoring in video, a lot of the like early editing language that I picked up came from just experiencing iMovie just intuitively. But like I was lucky to meet a whole group of people at RISD that I became friends with really early on, and we just have stayed friends ever since, and we're still friends. And in the beginning, we would make stuff together and not really think about who was making what or why we were making it necessarily. We were just making things because we wanted to, and everyone sort of had their own things that they were interested in, and we all worked on each other's projects. And Lizzie and I just had a very special creative bond that we never really talked about. It just made sense. And then slowly, like, once we were out of school and starting to show art in more of a professional context, we had to like think about what that meant, and that obviously changed. That's when we developed like a crediting system and different ways of acknowledging the way we work, because we always work collaboratively. I've never really done anything that's like completely 100% like a solo work. I mean, I don't.
It's interesting because especially in the West and maybe even the East now, but there is a strong emphasis on like the singular artist as genius, and the way in which you work really debunks a lot of that or challenges it, and really I think brings to the fore this idea that our artistry is very collaborative, and it is actually part of your process, as you said. Like you weren't really thinking about crediting at that point necessarily, but at some point you did have to think about that. And I noticed more recently, definitely the works have been co-branded, Brian Trecartin and Lizzie Fitch. So there seemed to be some switch, I guess. And is that because of a change in materials as well in the works?
Well, it's always evolved very slowly over time, like as the work evolves. When in the very beginning, like certain forms of art, like movie making or choreography or like play or music, it's just like everyone expects there to be credits, and they know nothing's made by one person alone, and they seek out the credits when they want to see who else was involved in a particular piece. But for some reason with like contemporary art, particularly like sculptures or painting or installation art, you don't see those people credited, and a lot of times they obviously add a lot of creative content to whatever's being made. When we had our first show in California, it was a whole group of us came together to make it. It was called the I Smell Pregnant show, and we made a ton of sculptures that sort of went that were all in one room, and then A Family Finds Entertainment, which I made in 2004, was in another room, and we just assumed we'd all put our names on the wall, and that would be it. And works were getting sold as my work, and it was really all of our work. Like Lizzie and I kind of like were like the directors in a sense, but so many of the ideas that were there were like on top of platforms that we provided, but the ideas were collaborative, And so we developed a crediting system at that point for sculptures, and ever since then we've had our sculptures will have like a main authorship line, and then they'll also have credits for like particular components, because casting's a big part of the work, like casting people's skills and talents and abilities. And we might have somebody make a particular component because they're able to use their hands in a certain way, or just because we like their poetic voice and how they might interpret an idea. It's the same with acting. It's very similar to acting. It's like someone might be casted to translate a script, someone might be channeling the words, someone might be actually acting, we might just be instigating them to perform. And all of these things are done, in collaboration, so the other person has like, real agency in it and steers it just as much as we do. And then the editing process in the end is what like kind of ties it into a form that gets presented as like a work. And Lizzie has been a part of that the whole time.
Right. Since 2001, and I think what's interesting to me is that there's sometimes a tendency to say that the collaboration is about the erasure of authorship and of individuals. And I actually think that outside of the crediting system, which is a different beast altogether in terms of the market, but the work creates a tension really between this interest in singularity and individuals and this notion of the collaborative and network identities too. I see that tension even in this movie. There's like this heightened tension that you feel, and this is going to be a bit of a non sequitur, but when I was reading the news yesterday about the murders of the synagogue, In Israel, like when I read about it, it doesn't really have much of an effect on me anymore. Those kinds of news items don't have that affect, like as they should. And there's a sense with your works that they make you feel. They make you feel alive in some way. And sometimes that aliveness isn't necessarily a comfortable feeling.
Thanks. I mean, what you were saying about the authorship as opposed to erasing it, I definitely feel like one of the things that Lizzie and I are particularly excited about is just like the idea of like the way people sort of network their creativity, and it's like I want to like give access to articulating that, so more information about how that happens is what's interesting to me. But I mean, one of the reasons why we never had like a collective or some sort of like band name was because it erases the people involved, and people always they pick one or two people to point to, and they become the face of that collective name. And then, I mean, things are different now, but that's just like going back in our heads about why, early on we never went in that direction, because a lot of people where we went to school were forming collectives and things like that.
Okay. The next work I wanted to show is Any Ever, that was done here in Miami.
Yeah.
And I thought because it was done in Miami, it would be a great piece to talk about. Before we show this 2-minute trailer of the piece, I think what I'm interested here in thinking about is also, again, this kind of networked identity, but a real hyper-presence of racial and gendered identities as well. So once again, like a deconstruction of those identities so that they don't seem completely recognizable, and yet they are. So I'm interested in kind of thinking about, again, those broader categories like race and gender, and wanted to get a sense from you how you think about that in your work. So let's play the clip and then Brian answer that question.
Being post-family and pre-hotel ends today for me.
Did you not identify with the demo? There's nothing wrong with stopping things early.
Adobe, do you think Brett would be mad if we stopped the premise early? Yeah, but...
JD, I just found out I'm driving! Hi, JJ!
I'm not the only star to do that stuff.
I've been a CEO since birth. I want that.
Oh! I'm just feeling out all my options, man! Finally!
I'm finally just an as-if. Sense me now.
Cedar, my advice to you.
I can't wait until they invent concept camo.
I'm gonna go wash off this picket fence and fuck up a tanning bed.
People, look at what I use. People.
Merch! Oh, one love acid.
Cute.
Hey, bitch. All I'm saying is...
Capitulation is sexy when you land on the right vibration.
And together, we're told. I try very hard to be transparent.
There are no people.
Create energia.
I love redistributing myself to people who haven't learned about me yet.
Where's Globalius? Your friends have no boundaries.
I
I also made this.
I'm describing a personality trait. And really rad, exchangeable, racially progressive body parts. Am I over-existing? Or am I over-existing? That's my inside joke. What? I'm really into the third world right now. I collect things. I just designed an airplane that has ashtrays in the aisle. Can you believe that? Ashtrays?
Are we? Feels like prison.
I love being in places that mean nothing to me. Now I can take this memory without fear of further utilizing it.
I know, baby, and I hate it. The possibilities pretend to be endless, but they're actually, I'm gonna bounce. Burn down the house, mail me a hotel.
There's a trailer for an exhibition that already happened at MoMA PS1, just to make that clear. But again, like there's whiteface, there's the makeup is such an important kind of element here in terms of identifying bodies. And I was wondering if you could talk again about those kinds of things like race and gender and how you channel them in your work.
Well, when I was making Any Ever, I was particularly interested in sort of a more like inventive space. where, you know, a lot of times in the earlier work, people would like maybe point to something and say that that was like, oh, you know, that's drag, or that's, you know, it was very categorical. People would like the way people would label it, and I was like, well, no, that's not really what that character is. It's like and then that's actually, you know, that's actually not even a guy dressed as a girl. You know, it's like, and that stuff doesn't even matter. And like one of the things I was particularly trying to get at was how, like, I don't know, there's, you know, we have like an understanding of like uprooting sort of gender from like sex, but I feel like there's all these other places in culture where, like, you know, like on YouTube, people would like we're starting to like access different accents to maybe sort of describe a particular thing. So they were like taking things that were maybe not necessarily something that they inherited from their geography, or from their culture, but they were like using them as the same way they would use like a word or like any sort of ism, or like a way to understand a particular piece of information. And I was trying to explore how sort of like a state where people were continuously inventing and sort of sharing their realities, and, you know, a state where what you are is not only you, but it's also like the relationships you maintain and how they sort of project onto you. And that's sort of like a really base level thing. I mean, that's not what the content in the movies is about, but sort of like how like the characters function inside of the movies in a way.
And again, I just love this interesting tension again between the idea that identity doesn't matter and it does matter at the same time, like in these works. Like you can't.
Well, it's like it matters like at the moment of transaction, but it doesn't. It's not like an ultimate state. So it's more like what you access to convey a particular message, but, you know, no one's like. But there's like a sense of that people are like liberated from like being consistently anything.
All right, because identity is usually, it's a fixed time and space, but often how we think about it is something that's timeless, right? Or that doesn't have those kinds of borders, maybe. Now, how does Miami as a city figure in your work as a character? Because you've lived in different cities like Philadelphia, you're living in LA now, and it seems like, you know, the cities themselves become an important actor in the work. So what was it like doing Any Ever here in Miami, retrospectively being away from it for a while?
Well, I really loved living here a lot. Like, I like the weather. And
except for today, right?
Yeah, except for today. But even if this is nice, I think. And it was interesting being in a place in America where there was like, you heard. I mean, I only speak English, but like you can hear so many different forms of Spanish, and obviously there's like other languages all throughout the city. And just being in a place where you're hearing all these different languages was really incredible for me. I don't know how it affected the movie, but I know it like affected me, so it must have. And also like being on a peninsula, I feel like it's like has this like particular kind of bipolar energy that I don't really know how to describe it. It's like transient and strange, and I like how low the trees are, and I feel like seeing like distance and humidity in the air, I feel like changed the color palette of everything. The city itself I was in 2008, 2009, so it was kind of like our neighborhood right when we moved in, like foreclosure signs were going up everywhere, and there wasn't many people on the particular street we lived on, so it was like really easy to do things and be really loud and have people come down. It was really cheap to have people come in, and we would just shoot anywhere. Like there was, we shot some scenes in like mall landscape parking lot areas that like never actually got stores in them yet. And then the landscaping was still there, and it really felt like an animation, or like it was like came from SketchUp, and it was rendered and ready, but it was like a model to be presented, but like it hadn't been built yet, and that's like what the feeling was. And there was all those cranes that were around back then, and then it kind of stopped being used. And
yeah, they went away for a while. They're back. They're here now, but I mean, just in terms of, I guess, space and the city, in terms of, thinking about Miami, like I wanted to segue to some of your works that you're doing right now, and you're very productive. Like you have 3 exhibitions up right now in Berlin, London, and LA, and they're all very different. But the first work I wanted to talk about, Diane, if you could put the slide up for that, is Site Visit, which is in Berlin at the KW Institute. In particular, I'm really interested in you talking about the body. We talked about maybe the body is raised and gendered, but in this work, I feel like in the way in which it's described here, where there's, let's see, it's like, I think 30 different speakers that are involved in creating a space. How did that come about? Like sound and space is becoming very important in your work, and if you could just Diana, show just a couple of the slides, the installation there. It's 6 projections, 3 on one wall, 2 on the other opposite side, and 1 on the ceiling.
Well, we for a while we've been wanting to make a 360 movie that really surrounds the viewer, and where you're sort of the movie's happening around you 3-dimensionally. And sound design has always been something that I focused a lot on, because the voice has always been very important to the movies and how people say their lines. And I feel like when I'm editing, I'm always trying to further extend and articulate what people are saying. And so sound design, the voices will be tweaked, they'll be altered, pitch will change, particular effects on particular words. Sometimes words will be replaced, and then there'll be a lot of times the sound, the music design I'll sometimes use it to almost advertise what they're saying, or articulate or enhance, or sort of push the meaning, or complicate it. And when we've been wanting to do that, not just in post, sort of do that in actual production. So, when there was a group of movies we made that were called Priority Infield, and in those movies we actually made a set where everybody was mic'd, and when they were talking, their voices were being altered and fed back into the space very loudly. And so they were being recorded by the cameras, and they were also being recorded by a computer, and then they were also hearing their own voice altered, auto-tuned in real time. And it really changed people's performances, because they were sort of hearing themselves abstracted and fed back to them in a better sounding way than they actually sounded. Or I think everyone that was performing liked the auto-tune, so it was fun, to hear it that way. But with Site Visit, we were shooting with tons of different kinds of cameras. We had sports cameras, we had drones flying around, and they were all consumer-friendly ones, ones that you could go to Radio Shack or a camera store and buy, and GoPros and stuff. And
Yeah, I mean, I read the word quadcopter for the first time.
Yeah.
This is drone,
Yeah, it's a drone. It's basically like a Phantom, and you put a GoPro on it, and it flies around, and you control it. And you can get these aerial shots that you never could get without a helicopter before, or some weird pulley system. And that we're trying to capture the space and tons of supplies for sound, for sort of redirecting the content in the editing process. And so the directing process became less following a script directly, and more about trying to achieve an agenda by pushing this script through the space, almost like an assignment. And then everything was captured and then used in this way. So, and sound almost became more important than the visuals, even though that's not necessarily true, that they're equal partners, but we spent a lot of time with the sound.
I'm also thinking that these works become more about the viewer and the viewer's relationship with these creation of what I think you're calling sculptural installations. And I was wondering if you could talk more about these sculptural installations that are now a very important part of how the work is meant to be experienced.
Yeah, Lizzie and I, we call them sculptural theaters, and they, basically we make them to kind of, it's important to me that the movies show in multiple contexts, because I think they're made to be native through different contexts. And if you watch something in a movie theater, you understand the form of it differently, and you have different expectations, so the content's digested in a particular way. And then if you watch it online, depending on what website or app or whatever you're watching it on, that changes as well. And then watching it in an art context where you're able to create some sort of a platform for people to view it in. Like what we're doing in like those settings is we're making these sculptural theaters, and we kind of see them as like jumping off points to navigate the work in a different way that doesn't necessarily have the language of a cinematic experience or an online experience, and where it's almost a little bit more like a gaming experience, because you navigate the space and you choose when to be inside of a movie and when to be inside of a different movie. But the way we sort of develop these spaces very much comes out of the form and the content of the movies themselves. So with Site Visit, it's a surround space, and the screens, there's 6 screens, and it's sort of mirroring the idea of 5.1 sound. So instead of so it's almost like there's like the center screen, like a stereo left screen, stereo right screen, surround screen left, surround screen right, and instead of like a subwoofer screen, it's like a ceiling screen, and it mimics the way it was captured in a way.
What I think is so interesting, something I wanted to highlight too, is that your work sometimes gets conflated with new media, or that it becomes a symptom of a particular time in the West. And I think what these works at least make clear for me too is that you're talking about something much more complex than about medium specificity. That this again is about these kind of complex ways in which identities kind of function. And here, really there's a nice, gracious kind of attention to the viewer. In a way a lot of video work doesn't in museums.
Well, I think that the whole like new media thing in technology, it's more that the way that has affected us as people and the way we use language is what's interesting to me. I care more about, I think the movies are much more about humanity than they are about technology. And I feel like when it comes to like an identity and character and personality. Yeah.
That's a great quote, the humanity, not technology. I really like that. It's very pithy, and I think it does get to the point of what's happening. The next work that's up in Los Angeles right now at Regan Projects, called Ledge, and this is again a collaboration between you and Lizzie, also connects with sort of space and sound and attention to the viewer. And I was really interested in a way, having not experienced these, so I'm just kind of reading about it and kind of thinking about what it would be like to experience them, but already getting a sense of what that might be like. That you have these, they're lined with chairs, for instance, one of the rows. And Diana, if you could maybe go forward 1 or 2 slides, that'll be the image of these lines of recliners. Or maybe not.
It's like basically it's a tent that we made, and inside of it there's these chairs that our friend that we work with a lot, he works on the animations, Brett LaRue designed, and they spin so that you can have the 360 experience, and they also have these vibrators in them that they're synced with the bass, so they shake the whole tent when the bass happens. So I don't know, kind of working a little bit more with like a 4D sort of experience, and trying to bring a little bit of like amusement park language into how we make the sculptural theaters. But yeah, it's hard to really say. is probably boring to look at, but it's a movie. We haven't figured out how we want to put it online yet because it's a 6-screen thing.
Which is a whole nother challenge,
Yeah.
and I mean, is that even something you want to need to do?
I kind of do. I just don't know how yet. I mean, I want to. I think it has to be online eventually.
Okay, that's all right. So, and the last exhibition that you have up, which is in London, the Priority Infield, which you referenced and talked about a little bit. And if you go to just the first slide here, this is one of the theaters, which kind of gives like a bird's eye view, right, of these different kind of, again, sculptural theaters that you've set up. I was just really surprised by, again, the architectural complexity of what you're creating. And in terms of the content of the works, the videos, which I've kind of ignored on some level by talking about the viewer and the body and all these things, but I'd love for you to kind of comment on this, is that the 4 movies that you have in this work deal a lot with sort of evolution and history, and or again this tension between those 2 ideas. And could you talk about your interest in those kinds of concepts and what they mean for you?
Yeah, this work started after I revisited a whole bunch of tapes that I made in high school. I went around, I moved to like a farm town in Toledo, Ohio, and it was just a very different, like, sort of recreational time. It spent very differently than what I was used to, and there was like a lot of like driving around and trashing each other's yards, and I went and I started documenting it because it was, I don't know, it was really, and at the time I thought I was making a documentary of some sort, or just doing something, and I put it away and hadn't looked at it for a long time. And then about 10 years later, when I was going through it, I realized how much like instigating was involved, and how much, you know, poking and getting people to do things, and you know, there wasn't a way to show stuff online at that point that was very valid. YouTube didn't happen until like 2005, right, so the way people like responded to the camera was very, very different than they do now. And so I got really interested just in the camera itself, and the way the camera's evolving so fast, and people's relationships to the camera, and in particular how it changes language, like performance language, or not even performance language, just like, you know, expression. And so then with these movies, so I edited that movie, and then with the other ones, I started to think about like sort of a post-human species that was sort of, and there was like maybe like these games or like universities where you could learn about like your ancestors. And in Center Jenny, I was kind of like framing this like more sort of like maybe as more on the entertainment side, and less historical and less educational, but still framed as an educational system, where you kind of, on the first level, you experience these very like misguided basic ideas of humanity from a very specific era, but then not really like saying what era it is. So you just have this sense that maybe it's like the early 2000s or something, but it's unclear. And there's like less sort of invention of personality in these movies, and it's like very basic. It's like that person's a girl, that person's a guy, and it's like really kind of generic. And it's like this system is being played out as a game, but it's also dealing with ideas of, because the person who owns the game is like this girl from a family that used to fund wars, and so it's kind of like dealing with like these ideas of privilege that, because she uses it to automate her homework, and I don't know where to go. But it's like there's a lot of plots overlapping in it, you know.
Yeah. I mean, we could play a quick clip of what you just described from Center Jenny. Might be worth showing, perhaps like just like 20 or 30 seconds of it, in which there is example.
I wrote the foundation to everything you ever articulated.
What the heck fucking face fuck you talk about?
Oh, you know what? The last time I crossed the road, someone made a joke about chicken.
And those animated chickens, someone told me something really significant about them. I'm gonna tell you about it right now.
Oh my god, that type of cool is most likely sexy.
Anyways, back to my chicken story.
Well, back in the human era, dinosaurs evolved into chickens. This is a fact, you know? And we do know about this. In one of the classes I teach next semester, it has to deal with the fact that dinosaurs did become chickens, and then, well,
Yeah,
you
no,
know.
I know all about that, yeah.
I know about that.
Oh my God.
Like, one of the things that we don't really talk about or people think about is after the dinosaurs devolved back into chickens, you know.
Sexy.
What the fuck are you talking about? Whose car is that? Like, I don't know what you're talking about, but my car isn't there.
Well, one of the things I know about the human era is that the sun looks in on your skin, and it makes you do really cool things when you're out in the club doing things with them bitches. And even when you be sucking them boyfriends' dicks, you still got them tan titties in your face. Titties in your face. And they record it, and they record it, and they record all of it.
They record all of it?
All of it.
They record all of
them tan
it?
titties. All them tan titties.
They didn't record that.
They recorded it all.
Oh, no, they didn't, because I didn't
Yes,
see
they
the
did.
car in the recording.
Yes, they did.
I miss capitalism from the era of humans because I used to capitalize on my human when I had my human things to do with chicken. It's been 6 hours that I was here. Otherwise, still was here. Razor blades as a gift. I have R. Move your
Why don't we
car
stop
and get
there?
out my face.
Finish that dinosaur story.
I'll finish.
What I found about these videos is they're very addictive. Like, so when I watch it the first time, you know, it's curious and interesting, and then I'm compelled to want to go back to it at some point again and again and again, and find something new when I do that. What I just want to briefly say, and then we'll move forward about this kind of notion of history and evolution is and time and space, which you're very interested in. You know, there's such a rich historical legacy to that, with going all the way back to, you know, even prior to that. But just think about Heidegger and his book Being in Time, and he was very interested in also history and evolution. History and evolution that led to Nazism for him, and I'm sure that's not where you're headed with your kind of conversations here, but it's fascinating again that there's so many connections, I think, to all kinds of other language or texts that are out there that you know, can kind of extend the work in interesting directions. So moving from this, I wanted to talk about maybe a different role of yours, which is being a curator. You are the curator of the new museum's Triennial, which is coming up next in March or so. This one's opening up, and you have been working with Lauren Cornell, formerly of Rhizome, on that. And I mean, there are two things. One, can you talk about the theme, which is surround audience? Yes, is that the theme?
Or it's a title. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
It connects so much to a lot of the things we've been talking about, in a sense. Talk about your role as a curator, I guess, and if that, how that connects to you being a director in your work and things like that.
I mean, I've been working with Lauren Cornell. I mean, Lauren Cornell has shown the work a lot, and we've worked together in different ways. And when she invited me to co-curate it with her, like, one of the ideas was just that I in the movies, casting is a huge part of them, and you know, creating platforms for people to be able to create within and add content to and collaborate. And for a long time, I've been wanting to do more sort of like working on other people's work where I can help maybe them get something produced, or just help, you know, just help like get it shown, because I've been able to show in a lot of places really early on, but you know, I'm surrounded by like a whole community of people who are all extremely gifted, insanely talented people doing amazing things, and so that was sort of one of the ideas that with the Triennial, you know, we would curate it in a different way. We tried to look at artists who were maybe not so easy to show because they weren't necessarily trying to exhibit their work in a contemporary art context. They were, you know, had that sort of rigor of a contemporary art dialogue, but that's not necessarily the home for their ideas. And with surround audience, we were thinking a lot about how a lot of the artists that we really liked sort of weren't necessarily seeing the audience as an other. They weren't using all these dichotomies that have existed for a while to talk about what art does and how it exists in the world. And just like that, we know people who sort of assume a spot or a place in their own audience because the audience side of things it's just as collaborative as the making of something and the presenting of something, and that separation not really completely existing anyway. And that's, I feel like, one of the more, basic ways of interpreting the title, but
it's just, I think one of the reasons I wanted to bring this
surround
up
audience.
is it connects so much to these ideas in your work that we've been talking about. I guess it was so uncanny almost when I read the title a couple of days ago when it was announced, the Triennial, that it connects so strongly to what you're doing. But one of the reasons I wanted to have you bring this up is just because pedagogically in universities, in MFA programs, for instance, or even BFA programs, we still instruct artists as essentially individuals who don't curate, who don't put together shows, and actually that's happening outside, and you're a perfect example of this kind of thing where it doesn't have to be so separate, or a problem maybe. And it's a very interesting disconnect between, I think, the academy and the ways in which I think instruction works, and the manner in which artists are functioning, which is making, collaborating, putting together exhibitions, producing.
I feel like so many artists curate. They just a lot of them are doing it in the friends' galleries and different things like that. But I feel like most people I know have done some form of curating. And most curators, I feel like, a lot of them do things that are borderline art, being artists. So
Yes,
it's
right.
the way it doesn't really matter.
Yes, we just started a curatorial practice program, and the whole idea is considering curating as an artistic practice, and not necessarily distinct from that. I just wanted to actually end with this really nice quote that I found, and it was by Roberta Smith, who doesn't always say very nice things in the New York Times when she does critiques, but she just says something very, I think, nice about you. And I'll just quote here. So, Mr. Trecartin seems intent on a kind of sensorial overload that you may initially think only new media can provide, but in many ways the idea of giving viewers more than they can instantaneously absorb is almost as old as art itself, and is what keeps us coming back to it. Earlier versions of this overload include the endless detail of Jan van Eyck's paintings, the collapsing simultaneities of Cubism, and Jackson Pollock's skeins of dripped paint. So it's wonderful kind of, connecting works to Jan van Eyck, Jackson Pollock. It's pretty amazing, I think, compliment, I think, from Roberta Smith. And I think, once again, why I want to end with this is because it really does speak to the fact that your work, I think, transcends these kinds of labels like new media and the internet, which often, again, get very attached to what you're doing. That they're doing things that Jackson Pollock was doing, that that they're using perhaps a different visual language, but they're connected and interested in those kinds of similar, maybe viewing experiences the same way. So I guess we'll turn it over to the audience for questions at this point. But thank you so much for entertaining me.
Thank you.
Switzerland?
Yeah. Or have I? We've shown work there before.
Because I remember being there and going into the museum and seeing some of your work.
Cool. Yeah. Well, we do. He was asking if the work was scripted and if we always just laugh or fall into laughter. The, there's a lot of different forms of script that goes on in it. I mean, a lot of the scenes are like straight up scripted, and we just like execute the script and we go through it. But there's always this, because there's no crew and there's no inside and outside of the shoots. We really run with tangents. So someone might say something that like they'll add to a script, and then all of a sudden 4 new lines are written like on the spot, like everyone together, functioning together, and then we'll go back to the script. And usually when things, I don't like stop people from laughing, or if I do, then that usually ends up having like a role in the editing process. So I don't know. There's like no, there aren't. We try to set up the shoot so that there's no outside of it. So the fallout can become supplies because it's happening all in that world of that particular night. And then there's a written script, but then sometimes we have more of like an agenda, a script where it's more like the ideas, and there'll be like notes and like a list of things that we want to accomplish, and there's not maybe a script for it. There might be keywords and like ideas and things to translate, and then like the set itself is a script, because we'll dress it in a way where we'll put props around, and we might tell somebody to like while they're saying a line to like use a prop, but we don't tell them what prop to use, and so there's like this association that happens that generates content that's really powerful because of someone's particular association with the line that's outside of what you can imagine, and it usually comes through with how they use the prop. And we always shoot at night because like that type of a script of like what your body's like at night fuels into it as well. And so I feel like every sort of step along the way is like thought of as a script, and like the final one is just the editing process and the presenting of it. But so even if it like wasn't scripted in a traditional way, I would still say they're all scripted because they are. But we do have like scripts too, like that are like written, more traditionally.
Well, interesting that watching your evolution as an artist, going from kind of a conventional 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional reality to a 4th-dimensional reality, and now you're talking about outside of it, outside of all of that, it's still inside of a conventional theatrical kind of setting where the audience is the audience and the production is the production. Do you have an ambition or a plan to interact in time with the audience or the witness or the people who are coming to see your work?
Yeah, I do. I'm not sure exactly how yet, but I think that the movies are sort of constructed in a way where revisiting them and sort of remembering them sort of builds the ideas inside of them. So I feel like they have a type of collaboration with the audience, because there's like huge, plot gaps that are there on purpose, and certain ones that, when you have to make that jump, you sort of, you write code in your own head and remembering it and cross-referencing it with other movies from that body of work that you might have seen. Because it's almost like time zones that don't necessarily like add up to the same consequence or the same outcome. But we're moving in this more surround or 360 way of capturing stuff on the production end. It's become much more involved in, and I'd like to extend that somehow into the experience of it. But I'm still at this moment interested in making movies, which I think doesn't give the, I feel like with a game you would give like the viewer a whole bunch of agency, and with a movie there's certain types of agencies the person has, and I like pushing movies more towards the game side of the continuum. But right now I'm still interested in kind of having it still function as a movie where you're being directed through the experience in some way, but I do think there's a way to make a movie where you're participating in a way that's not like a pick your own adventure style. It'd be something that's much more VR, or like using we got an Oculus, we're trying stuff, but we'll see. I don't know.
Are all of the elements in the production chained together? Are they sequentially consistent? Or are there different timings within the different elements of the different screens, or it is one work?
Oh, in the surround one?
Yes.
Yeah, it's one work. There is, the whole thing's synced, and so all the edits are considered and in relationship to each other.
Any questions?
Sorry, that's weird. I recently came across I'm wondering what your influences are, I guess, in some kind of way, but I'm also mainly trying to ask you about Hakim Bey, if you've ever read Hakim Bey, and if you have anything to say about him, because I see in your work a lot of these ideas of temporary autonomous zones, sort of immediatism, sort of letting there be a removal filter from how we perceive the world, and sort of emancipation from not just reality, but even sort of the current moment. I don't know if that is something that you can, I don't know, I just digest that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as influences go, I really try, well, I guess I don't try that hard to do this, because it's kind of like naturally how I glean information, but I like to let things combine in my head. Mm-hmm. So I try to, like, when I'm experiencing content and culture, and when I'm reading something or when I'm watching something, to sort of like look at it as if we all made it, and not really think about things as like bodies of work or like linear histories, and allow the content to sort of mix and sort of like become up like mud that I then allow to come up with associations that if I was pointing to directly, it would be hard to create out of it, because you'd be too aware of what you're pointing to. Yeah. And so I feel like one of the things I want to do as an artist is be able to work with content freely without it being something that traps me. So when it comes to inspirations, I have a ton of them that are like everywhere. And I mean, basically like anything maybe that I've seen ever. Yeah. And so I don't know what I would list.
But that's interesting. I think that's something that makes me think of my opinion of like listening to the radio, where you listen to some awful radio station like Power 96 or something, where you just have this stream of top 40 hits and whatnot, and you listen to it to a certain degree, and it becomes just this ongoing drone of the same sort of party beat and whatnot, and it becomes a different thing. It's not even all those songs you were listening to. It's this own monster, and that mixing of things is very interesting. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I might know the answer, but I want to know, are you an optimist or a pessimist?
I'm an optimist.
Yeah. Because I'm so moved by how optimistic you are. You can't really, you enjoy. I mean, we enjoy the work because it makes us happy.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like there's some darker elements in the newer work, but I'm
Yeah, but that's,
still
we're artists, so we like the dark shit. We just feel like there's going to have to be a happy ending. Yeah. And also, thanks for the beds, because I laid in those beds.
Yeah.
And that was the best way to look at your work.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
So this is maybe just more a thought. When I was reading the press release for the Triennial, surveillance came up a lot, and I wanted to think about, or have you think about, self-surveillance, like in the evolution of the earlier work when you were looking back at the high school stuff and you were saying like YouTube wasn't there yet, so the relationship of your performers to the camera, and then maybe like how that's changed over time, and thinking about just surveillance and self-surveillance.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, okay. So, for regarding the Triennial, I think one of the exciting things about the show is that there's a lot of contradiction in it, and allowing a lot of almost like I kind of feel like everyone has their own time zone, and we're like allowing ones that are very far from each other to be like coexisting in the same space, and so even like Lauren and I like have very different like ideas about surveillance and what we ourselves don't like are allowing ourselves as curators to think of the different terms differently, and when we talk together we even we'll take a turns because we have a different idea of what the title means and different things like that. But as far as like surveillance with like, so it's interesting. Like in 1999, 2000, when that was filmed, when I brought out the camera, the first reaction people would have is they would call me a narc, and they'd be like, "Why are you filming us? Like, there's the only reason why you'd want to film this. Like, there was no need to film anything because you couldn't share it. So it's like the only thing that will happen is that the cops will get it or your parents will find it. And why is that something And then like, but there was also the same year Blair Witch came out, and also there was like the Jackass stuff was going on, and so there was a little bit of a cultural way to like kind of be like, yeah, but what about this thing, And people slowly got really, really into it because it was like, yeah, like. I don't know, this idea of like, were we making a movie where we just filming something, it didn't matter, it was just like, eventually it'll be used, and I think people just had that feeling that we would use it somehow. And these are all my like friends and peers, so this isn't like, like documenting something else. Like, I actually became friends with a ton of people I probably wouldn't have become friends with if I wasn't doing it, like everyone on the football team. And, But I noticed that people back then when the camera came out, they'd forget it was there really fast, or they would like sit there and like narrate, but in this very like confessional booth style way. That now I feel like the language of like when a camera pops out is people still sometimes don't want to be filmed because they're very much like aware of being their own PR agent and everything, but I think people have like. Have many more skills of how to use their body in front of the camera, and like how to say something in one context knowing that a camera's filming them, and also be saying something to that camera and like coming up with something that works for both situations. And like those skills that people have developed are, I think, get like sort of resourced or used in the work, but I wasn't seeing it so much in this early footage.
And off of that, does it make it easier or harder for you? I mean, it could also be in between, but to have people be so self-conscious or have already like a way of dealing with themselves on camera?
I mean, I try to, when I'm casting them, I think about that and like the different levels of that and willingness to behave in those certain ways. And I mean, so we're friends. And so how like all the people we know, there's like lots of people access that way, that part of existence differently, just in like the people we know.
Right.
And you can see it in a scene, like the different abilities and it's more of a willingness thing.
But when you're casting, you're thinking already about the person's ability to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or willingness too, because I feel like sometimes it's more like it's not something they would do in their life, but knowing that they have the ability to do it.
Right.
And then figuring out if they have the willingness to access it. I mean, talking kind of vaguely, but I guess I just mean like the different skills of talking first, second, third person all at the same time.
Yeah.
But I also think that there's an interesting thing happening with cameras where they're disappearing, and screens are less important, and I feel like all that like dialogue about like the fourth wall and stuff when it comes to screens, like the audience and everything is like not maybe so interesting anymore because it's not even like a natural barrier anyway, and I feel like it's the camera, like where the camera is disappearing because it's becoming a little more omni, where it just potentially, like with 360 cameras and with like being able to like particle scan a space and get the three-dimensional information and being able to record 3D sound, you know, it's like you don't have then, you're not able to like crop and edit in the same way. So it's more about the navigational tools to like understand the material that's been captured. And I kind of feel like the tools are for navigating content are going to be sort of like screens or something.
Like making it less of a filter.
Yeah, and more of, well, you have to figure out a way to like navigate the content. If you record everything, if all information in a room is recorded for an hour, like what it smells like, what it sounds like, what it, you know, in 360, then no one can perform to a particular spot knowing that they're translating a certain kind of information. So it's more like people perform through making their own tool to navigate it and then sharing that tool. So it's like the editorial process is to like post one in a way, and I feel like people are more used to multiple cameras being around in one setting now, and so I feel like people are getting relaxed again in a different way. So it's like a not caring, because it's like you can't control it, and like, but you can control how the supplies. You can make a version of control on the supplies afterwards. So the real timeness is like shifting to like an editor or something.
I mean, what I think is really exciting about your work is that it evolves with all of this, right? So like you're able to continue to like evolve your process and craft and the way that you're thinking about all of this with the advances that, like what you were saying before, that like it's not about new media, but it like develops with new media. So
yeah, I mean that's it. Yeah, I think Lizzie and I try to. Yeah, I think we're also kind of consumers, so so you know we'll be like, you know, if there's like someone making this little mobile camera, we want to get it and try it, and then you know, so it's like we're into consumer, prosumer, like level gadgets and the ones that involve capture and stuff. So I feel like naturally it just happens that way for us. But, yeah.
Hi, Ryan. I actually wrote my PhD dissertation on your work, so I'm very happy that you're here. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on some of the auxiliary projects that you do and how they function within your broader videos. For example, the photo shoot you art directed for the fashion magazines, and River of the Net that you co-founded with David Karp, and some of the other auxiliary projects aside from the general video works that you do. And also I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit how Google Plus is going to be involved in the Triennial.
So we're still not sure yet how they're going to be involved in the Triennial, so I'm figuring it out. But with like the photos I did for W, I was sort of thinking of like the form of the fashion editorial as like a script, and the body as like the platform to like house that script, and so they functioned as portraits because that not necessarily of the people that they are, but sort of like definitely reflect on the way those people have been in the movies for a long time, in a sense, because like every one of those four people was like a kind of a major collaborator. So it's like the PDFs are sort of like how those pieces were scripted are available on like this magazine, and it's I guess that's the form of it. Does that make sense?
And so because it was in a fashion magazine and the way they're styled, there's a conglomeration of consumer products, like a lot of things you might find in Chinatown on Canal Street, like a lot of faux Rolexes and a lot of the way that you styled that shoot. Can you talk a little bit about consumerism in your work and how you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's this way of using things as language that happens in the way products are accessed. They might not be accessed for their function. They're most likely accessed for their sort of like accumulated like cultural meaning, and particularly how they're combined and like hybrid with other things like a particular texture or a color, or just like how they're being worn and how that relates to how they're supposed to be worn or supposed to be used. And so like logos and anything, it's less about like what that company stands for, or it's more about its value inside of culture and how people access it and what kind of content has come out of it being used by people in the world. So like when I was making those scripts, if like one of the ideas was like to have, I'm trying to remember because I made this a while ago, but like somebody was gonna have like French tip teeth, and it's like thinking about like just the French tip like nails and how common they are and how it's like the easiest thing to go get at a nail salon, and like I don't know, the mouth and chew stuff with it. So just like association, trying to create associations through these things that like develop ideas for thinking about the photo as you like glean through it. I should have thought of a better example. Oh, like the necklace, whatever. Okay, so but then the other thing, I can talk about the other thing better. The river of the net. I mean, that one came from a place where I was really getting frustrated with like interfaces and just feeling like there must be a way to intuitively like navigate video content without having to like be stuck in this like broadcast mode where you're like clicking start and stop and things have a beginning and an end, and you have to go to a different page for each video, and then we were also thinking about the way people could like work together to sort of like almost make a movie. And the idea was just that like you could upload a video and it's 10 seconds or shorter, and you make 3 tags for it, and if that tag already exists, then there's more tags for that. And if there's no interface, there's a minimal one, but when you first go to the site, it just starts playing right away, and it just randomly picks one of the tags that exists, and it just surfs that tag until it's out, and then picks another tag. So in a sense, like a movie would be the arc of a tag. So like whatever videos are up on there that have the tag car would just like play out, and it's almost like this like glean sense of what like car the movie would be made from multiple people's sort of contributions of their association of like why they tagged it car.
So in essence, you've extended this concept of collaboration, not just with your friends, but you're allowing anyone in the public to collaborate and have a dynamic, ongoing video that grows.
Yeah. And then, but it's also just kind of like how like a movie can be. It's almost like a specimen, it's like a sample of like at a particular moment in time what whoever's like contributing to this thing, what is the consensus of like car. And then we wanted to develop this thing where you could type you could run a text into the program and say it was like a poem, and if it would highlight any of the words that happen to have tags, and then it would string those videos together randomly by pulling something from the tag, and then it's like you have this like visual interpretation that's a movie of that script. And so we were trying to think of like creating tools for thinking and for generating ideas, and it's almost like a research tool more than anything else. And I was just kind of also like frustrated with this idea of like hubs, like like Facebook, where like everything goes to one place, and sort of wanting to like celebrate the idea of like creating tools for people that you use in your own way because you have to access it as its own thing, and it is its own thing, and use it however you want to.
We're going to thank Brian and Dr. Patel. Thank all of you for coming, but there's good news and there's bad news first. There's a class coming in here at 7:30. That's why you see me like a little anxious here. But I wanted to tell you a couple things. There's going to be a meet and greet back at the Frost Art Museum. There's food, there's drink, and Ryan will be there to answer more of your questions for whomever didn't get to answer any question. And the next presentation in the Helen Venero Artist Lecture Series will feature Shirin Nishat in spring 2015. She's an award-winning filmmaker, photographer, and video artist. The Iranian-born Nishat's work is known for its stark and stirring imagery about the boundaries between men and women, East and West, exile and belonging. So thank you again for coming, and please join us back at Frost Art Museum.